We will speak in English, of course, and if it's possible or necessary, I will translate a little bit, but not too much. And first of all, I have to say, and it's really true, Paul, we met before, it's not our first time, but it's the first time, of course, here in that context, that we both, Andreas and I, we really love your work. We share the love for your work, for your amazing movies. I just want to mention I, Daniel Blake, which is really overwhelming experience to see that movie, and we both share East German School English, which is a very entertaining element, so sorry about that. We try to give our best. On the other hand, we have amazing Scottish English right now, which is a challenge as well. We will manage that. Andy, would you take please your microphone? This is a podium discussion. Of course,
I'm already horrified.
No need. Paul, I would love to start with Andreas with the most difficult question because I'm really curious about your answer. Could you describe a little bit, Andreas, what is really so astonishing for you at the work of Ken Loach? Of course, we should mention Ken Loach. He has been a very long-term collaborator with Ken Loach and wrote a lot of his amazing movies. What is for you the greatest thing at movies of Ken Loach and Paul Laverty?
I think that he loves the people he's speaking about. So that's what I'm always feeling when I'm seeing these films. You know, I have always the feeling that I'm so close to these characters, yeah? And even if they have a lot of contradictions, of course, but I'm feeling close, and I have always the feeling that he's very honest and brave with his view onto society. My first connection with Ken Loach was in the beginning of the 90s when I was in London and I saw Riff Raff in a cinema. And this was for me a really amazing experience because, you know, in Germany at these years we had these more or less stupid comedies, you know, and no social reality at all in the cinemas. And I saw this about these beautiful, funny, sad construction workers, and at the end they were burning the house they have built, and this was a kind of inner revolution for me, and I realized, okay, we should do something similar in Germany because our reality is not better than in England, of course. It's we have a lot of social problems, and so we should bring that on screen, and so for that reason. From that day on, I'm a real big fan of your work and of Ken's work, and I think you are people who have your heart at the right place, you know, in my opinion. That's what I love, so and it's a pleasure and a big honor to be on stage with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was a good beginning for the discussion, wasn't it? Get you into the right mood.
Now I have to admit, I gave him 20 quid to say that. Yeah. a brown envelope. Yeah. It was like Spanish elections.
Thank you again for that.
So, I mean, the question is really, why are you so interested in that? What Andreas described so much, a really social conflict to mirror society and all this conflict. Is there a reason, maybe in your biography and in your life story, that you are so aware of these problems?
First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for turning up, and I'm really sorry I can't do this in either German or in English. You're going to get the Glaswegian version. So if you see two confused faces there, you'll have to help. There must be at least one Scotsman in there, I suppose. And it's a great pleasure to be here, it really is, and especially with these two gentlemen. And I've had the great privilege of having interviews with Knut, you know, several times in the past. And I missed Andreas 4 or 5 years ago in Glasgow by the skin of my teeth, so it's a great pleasure now. So that's all the mutual compliments over and done with. From now it's going to be insults. Well, I mean, I got into filmmaking totally by accident. I mean, I still sometimes have to pinch myself and realise that I've had the good luck to be doing this. So it's always a kind of a state of confusion with me in filmmaking. But I suppose at a very early age, I was sent off to seminary, and I ended up being taught by Catholic priests and Jesuits from the age of 12 till I was 20. And after that experience, I felt like I'd been imprisoned. You know, not just metaphorically, but physically. And ever since then, I suppose I've just had the most incredible curiosity for people, cultures, life, and I wanted to travel. And so I've just had curiosity about people, and I think sometimes some kids are just like that. I remember I used to get a smack round the ear from my mum from staring at people, and I'd just be in a fantasy, just amazed and trying to imagine their life. And I caught myself doing the same thing coming through the airport this morning. There was a guy who took my passport, and he just looked so sad, and he had kind of big jowls, and he had a scar underneath his moustache, and I wondered if he was trying to hide it. And then I realised the next person was trying to get on and move me along. So I suppose there's always a kind of a curiosity about people's lives. And also I think once you get to, when you're with people, I actually trained as a lawyer, and that was a real eye-opener for me too, because you just heard people's stories. You know, I worked in a Glasgow FIILM, and so it was a mixture of, you know, poor people from the West End of Glasgow, we did, East End of Glasgow, did a lot of criminal work, you know, homelessness, you know, employment law. And so that was a real kind of crash course in life after being hidden away in seminary for so long in university. And I was just amazed at the people's choices, the richness of their life, their contradiction, their intelligence, their fear, their anxieties, sometimes absolutely hilarious, sometimes totally tragic. And I suppose I've always had a sense, and a bit like you when I saw Riff Raff, I mean, ordinary people's lives are just massively complex, you know, but we don't have to just swallow the American version of it. And there's many great exceptions, tremendous films too, but this idea of the hero and the three-act structure and all of these things, I mean, life is more complex and quirky than that. And I think we have an inbuilt instinct to empathy, to try and understand, and curiosity. And so I think if we can do that in story, I think you're halfway there, because I remember when we talked about Daniel Blake, for example, and it's about an old bloke who's going to get denied his sickness benefit. I mean, it doesn't sound too exciting, really. But if you get to know him and you can try and communicate on film what you see in your head, the person's contradictions, his fear, his life, his past. I mean, I think everybody's life is just absolutely marvellously complex. You know, I mean, people slag people off all the time for being boring, but when you actually, even the most boring person at a party, if you sit down and talk to them, you'll always discover something fascinating. So for me, a lot of writing is actually listening. Not to copy, but to try and put yourself in another person's shoes. And I think I don't know if there's writers here today, I think it's a great thing to do is sometimes just to be quiet and to listen. Because you hear the most amazing things. And also I find as well, if there's the right atmosphere, people will share their lives. You know, their fears and their hopes. And you might not use that, but it gets you into another space and makes you think of things you might not otherwise have done. Sorry, I didn't mean to be as long as that.
No, it's great. Thank you.
And I want to say, what is so interesting in the way of your storytelling is that you're speaking about a strong world we are living on. You are speaking about the capitalism, how we experience that. You are speaking about the horrible social welfare system in Great Britain. Yeah. But on the other hand, there is always a kind of hope. No? There is solidarity in between the people, in between the poor and simple people. We can see that tonight. Daniel Blake, I think, when he met Katie or his neighbor, you know, all these people are living under the same condition, but they try to stay together in a way. And this is what gives me hope finally, and this is what makes me cry also. On the other hand, because in our world, I think we do not have so much hope, especially in our days now. And so this is nice to experience that these things are in between the characters in your stories.
Thanks, Andreas, for getting onto that, because I think it's really, really important. Because sometimes when you see, you know, films that are tough, and I mean, tragedy has its place, you know, in storytelling. All we have to do is look at Shakespeare and many other masters before that. But also I think this notion of hope is really, really important. So it doesn't become just a catalogue of misery. And then you're right in Daniel Blake. I should maybe explain a little bit just how we did some of the research for that, really, because research makes it sound very, very fancy because sometimes you don't know what you're going to do. You have an instinct. But what really fascinated us was that there was a YouGov poll, an opinion poll was taken. And they found out that the average person in the UK thought that 25% of the entire welfare budget was fraudulently claimed. I mean, that was a recent poll. The reality is it's 0.6%, and most of that is dwarfed by the benefits that are unclaimed. So you ask yourself, why can there be such a massive miscalculation in the population's attitude to welfare? And of course, when you see the kind of terrible right-wing television that we have in the UK now, or the red-top newspapers, like The Sun, for example, owned by Murdoch, there is campaign against people on welfare. And it's like full of, there are some chancellors out there, but it's a tiny, tiny minority. And most people, many people don't claim what they should have. So I suppose that dislocation, such a massive contortion, was very, very interesting to us. And then we started talking to people young people in 0-hour contracts. I think you're far too sensible here to have those, where, one day you get 5 hours work, another day you get 2 hours work, another day you'll get no hours work. So it threw people's lives into absolute confusion. So I started talking to all these young kids who were hungry. They started describing feeling nauseous going to a shift, but very casually. And I started thinking how many people in this country are hungry? Then we started going to the food banks and just talking to people who had been sanctioned. There was a very, very important thing. When the Tories came in after the crisis, the last time, they decided as a matter of policy to raise sanctions against people in benefit for the slightest thing. So there's no natural justice about it. There's more natural justice about a parking ticket than there was for people losing their entire benefits. And what we saw was a really punitive system designed to deter people from going into the benefits. And then I started speaking to whistleblowers inside the ministry. I don't know if you've seen Daniel Blake, but there's workers inside the Department of Work and Pensions. And then you realise they were being bullied. And then suddenly, from just thinking this is, one bureaucratic screw up after another, you begin to realise there is a systematic intelligence to make people suffer so they will be frightened, so they won't come in. They were introduced, that this language that they have is almost like Orwell talked about. They talked about footfall, the decision maker, mandatory reconsideration. All the things which really meant that people were going hungry. I mean, you went to the food banks, you met people who had been sanctioned, feeding biscuits to their children, people choosing between heat and food. Then you find out from researchers that something like 4 million people are food insecure in Britain, the fifth biggest economy in the world. So in a way you've got to dig down to get the picture. And then what we did was, I just travelled up and down the country, talking to people in food banks, getting their experiences, and then you begin to realise that fits there, this fits here. And then it gave us the confidence then to say at the end of that film that Daniel Blake was driven to an early death by the state. That's a big, big allegation to make. But I wanted it not to be thrown out in a Donald Trumpian fashion. I wanted it to be researched, I wanted it to be truthful, and again, of course, it was criticised in Parliament by Damien Green, who's the Minister of State, and then he admitted, of course, afterwards they hadn't seen the film, which was a great advantage to us. He even got better, he goes, I've seen the trailers, and there's only one trailer, but he must have seen the same one again and again, which did make us laugh. But so there was a massive debate about it. And it is strange as well when you get back to talking about ordinary people's lives, because we thought we were doing this very modest little film about an old fella who was denied his sickness benefit. But it was amazing travelling with this film to New York, to Moscow. There's even been activists now in South Korea who've been spray painting I Chuk Nang, or whatever his name was. I'm not a dog, I'm a man, and they all got arrested. And disabled workers in Scotland have been trying to send money to pay the fines. So you see this kind of network of solidarity building up, which is remarkable. And because it became a story about dignity, and I think we didn't really quite realise it was going to have that resonance. So sometimes filmmaking it's like betting, isn't it? You must find that, Andreas. You don't know. We did a film in Iraq and nobody watched it. And you think, oh God, that was terrible, that was painful. And then you get something like Daniel Blake, where it seems to have a big echo. And you can never quite judge, So I think that's the fascinating thing about, I know many of you will be involved in your own stories. it's a leap of faith, isn't it? Sometimes you just have to gamble.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, the food bank scene, by the way, is unbelievable in the movie. It's so touching and it's unforgettable. You know, that scene when she's trying to eat as much as possible in that moment. I will never forget that scene. But I mean, we have a kind of a topic, and this is not so bad, I think, to think about social cinema, of course, but there are a lot of dangers working that way. And you mentioned in the beginning a bit, like, we don't want to have a catalog of miseries, and we don't want to have a catalog of messages. And I would really like to know from the both of you, how can you avoid to have characters who are just a kind of even good propaganda? We need persons who have it, who are really human beings of flesh and blood. And I think it's extremely important to develop a script and a story and the characters that way, even, or especially if you have an idea, if you have a message. So that's a question for both.
I think it starts with a real interest, you know. Paul already explained that, because it starts with a lot of researches, I think. Maybe you have a topic, but a topic isn't the film. You know, you need a character, you need contradictions, you need a kind of step outline. You have to develop all these things. So, but if you have a real interest for people, I think that helps you to avoid social cliches. I think, because even the poor people or the people who are under pressure in our societies, they do a lot of things wrong. You know, they fight. They fight in between themselves. They do not have solidarity at all the time. So, and you have to figure out to make these characters full of contradictions and to make them believable. And this helps you to avoid social cliches, I think. And that's what I really like in your work and in Ken's work. That I feel the blood in the veins of these characters. You know. Even when you get to know Daniel Blake in the beginning of this movie, he's not a friendly guy to his neighbor. You know, you see this misanthrope, and you say, okay, what the hell? Why can't he be friendly to his neighbor? And so step by step, you see behind that surface what kind of man that is, and you feel his whole professional life behind this surface, and more you fell in love with the character, and that's the fantastic work Paul and Ken did, I think, to bring these characters close to our hearts, and to avoid the cliches of a kind of anti-capitalist propaganda. No one wants to see that. Of course, we want to see stories in cinema. We want to see real people, and I think what Paul explained is to step into the society, to do the researches is the most important thing, and then you can start to tell about people.
Yeah, well, I think there's, you mean, like, I totally agree with you. A good subject matter doesn't make for a film, and you can't copy a script off the street. You know, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, I think you have to have a great, I mean, you want to have that frisson. You say, well, what's going to happen here? I mean, I love the premise to you talked about it earlier, Cloud 9. You know, someone who's been, you know, with someone for 30 years and falls madly in love with someone else. You know, and you think, oh, Jesus, what's going to happen there? You can sense all the contradictions already. I mean, that's part of storytelling. It's getting a premise that's fascinating. And sometimes a story ambushes you. We did this little film called Looking for Eric. I don't know if any of you are football fans with Eric Cantona. You know, so that was the exact opposite of research. For a long time, I'd wanted to tell a story about older people who were grandparents, and nobody wanted to do the story. But then when Cantona came and said, well, we'd love to work with you, and I had a terrible flu, and he came along to meet Ken and said, well, I've got this idea of someone who'd followed him from Leeds United to Manchester United, and I just couldn't pay the bit of, I mean, I just wasn't interested in that story, but I was fascinated by football and this personality of this character. And then I thought, and I remembered an amazing goal he scored when he stuck out his chest after scoring the magnificent goal, and he was absolutely full of confidence. And you could see this communication between him and the rest of the 50,000 fans. And I thought, what happens if there's another little man in the crowd called Eric, and he's the exact opposite of him? you know, who's losing a sense of himself, who's panic attacks, who's got no self-esteem. His children and his stepchildren don't pay attention to him, and he has an imaginary relationship with Eric, the King of Manchester United. You know, so sometimes you're just lucky. You know, I mean, in that moment. And I remember going to see Big Eric, and I said, how do you fancy a story where this old fella takes panic attacks, he smokes too much spliff, he's a granddad, he hasn't worked at his family, and he has an imaginary relationship with you? Are you up for that, Eric? And he just burst out laughing. You know, and so that was how Looking for Eric came around. So sometimes it's an accident, you know, but you've got to see a way into it. Because if it's one catalogue of misery after another, I mean, that's not an experience of life as well. I mean, you know, I mean, when you talked, I mean, I remember meeting the cleaners. We did a film called Bread and Roses in Los Angeles, and it was based on many cleaners who'd come up from Central America. And these people were unbelievable. Their life stories were unbelievable. You know, that families had saved money, they'd passed through El Salvador, Guatemala, passed by, you know, all sorts of gangs, and eventually get through the desert and into Los Angeles. You know, when you speak to them, their lives are just unbelievably dramatic. You know, many tragic, great hope, and also, but when you're with them, you'll laugh your heads off with them. You know, and it's a way of, I mean, I think that's part of our lives. Way of coping with things, this humour and the tragedy, and it's surreal sometimes, and it's so kind of outrageous that if you actually, you know, did it the way it was, you know, you wouldn't believe it. And exactly the same with Daniel Blake. Some of the stories I heard were so unbelievably harsh, so vicious. You know, people dying of starvation, you know, because they're mentally unstable. People dying of heart, you know, dying of cancer, being deemed fit for work. You know, I met all these people. But if you pick that as a premise to a story, you would just find it so hard to relate to it because it just seems so outrageous. So in a way, as a scriptwriter, I think you have to shape it and frame it, you know, and build a set of relationships and characters so that, you know, flowing from that premise, everything flows in a natural way, so you don't feel the words of the writer. Or if you feel them with a two-dimensional manifesto, you will undermine absolutely everything that you do, and it'd be really stupid.
And one thing is also very important, I think, it's the humor, you know, because I always find so much of humor in your stories, you know, and these people you are talking about, they don't say all the time we have a lot of pressure on our shoulders, and we are totally disappointed of our life for all these social pressures and all these. No, most of the time, what I really liked, and when I saw Riff Raff for the first time, it was the humor in between these construction builders, even if they were under pressure, and of course there's a lot of humor in I, Daniel Blake as well, and so I think it's not it's not just a social statement. It's about people. It's about characters, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great saving grace, isn't it? I mean, you have tragic stuff going on, but there's some cities I think that are just prone to it. I mean, they did a film, and it was a very tragic film actually in Liverpool, Route Irish. But the people were marvellous. Or in Glasgow, I mean. You just meet, you know, a lot of people that just, you know, there's a kind of a sparkiness to them. I don't know. I remember I was going to tell you this story. I remember get time outside with when Bono went to Glasgow. Did you ever hear this story? He went to do a concert in Glasgow. I don't know if this ever reached Germany on the net. And anyway, he was doing, before he started his concert, he called everybody to be quiet. And then he started clapping his hands. And every time he clapped his hands, he said, every time I clap my hands, a child in Africa dies. It was all quiet. And then someone shouted out, well, stop doing it then, you evil bastard. That's not, I mean, if you called him a sanctimonious wanker who doesn't pay his taxes, you know, that would resonate. But if somebody shouts that, you just never recover from it, can you? So I think humour has its own power, you know? Yeah, I think humour has power. Yeah. It was very funny as well. I don't know if you know the Daniel Blake. You remember right at the very end, after he sprays the paint and all this, then there's a Scotsman jumps over the fence. Okay, and he starts, and Ken casts real policemen to arrest Daniel Blake. This is very boring for people who haven't seen the film. But anyway, at one point, Daniel Blake gets arrested for spray painting on the wall. And then this drunken Scotsman comes up and tries to defend him. But anyway, the policeman, Ken casts real policemen who are off duty. But anyway, as he jumped over the fence and started calling them all sorts, yeah, you wanker, you bastard, you know, all this. And then the policemen are shouting, we're in a film, piss off, piss off. Trying to shout at him. And they had no idea that, you know, he wasn't a guy just passing by in the street, you know. And he was a ballet dancer. He was trained as a trained ballet dancer, this lad. Anyway, that would have been me if I hadn't made any films. I think I'd have gone crazy like that.
So Paul, you just mentioned Looking for Eric, a movie that I really love a lot, and I'm very grateful for it, because we have here another very interesting aspect of social realistic cinema, because it can be also a fairy tale. I mean, in a way, Looking for Eric is a fairy tale, or Olive Tree that you wrote for your amazing wife, by the way, you directed that. So it's also like a fairy tale. Tim Thaler is a fairy tale, obviously. So, but I mean, it's not always necessary to have a really realistic story to mirror the society. You can use even these patterns of storytelling in a fairy tale way. Why? Is it possible, sir?
Well, that's the beauty of our imagination, isn't it? It's how do we engage people? We've only got, that's the amazing thing, you know, you have a novel you can spend, I'm reading this wonderful novel just now, which is Second-Hand Time. You've got, you know, I think there's about 2,000 pages of that size, you know, but in a film you've only got an hour and a half or 2 hours, you know, so we have to use shortcuts. You know, I think you have to imply so much, and I think we have to just use the skills and copy the formats that are steeped in our childhood, I suppose. So I think fairy tales and metaphors, when you listen to the New Testament, I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's just some of the, you know, some of the stories that are told there, you know. You know, Jesus was a master at it, wasn't he? You know, the Catholic Church were masters at it. How they would tell little stories in 15 minutes, and certainly in my case with the Jesuits, we were even actually told stories about Marxism to undermine Marxism. You know, so some of it's indoctrination, and some of it can be enlightening. And I think that's the great Birth of a Nation. That was used again. Look how that was used, and it led again to the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. So we don't always assume they're positive stories. You know, look at the narrative that we have just now, isn't it? You know, I was thinking about that. I read today that I think this is the 70th anniversary of one of my favourite books by Primo Levi, The Drowned and the Saved. It was 70 years ago this year, and one of the beautiful things I remember about him was saying, "How dare we assume that every stranger is an enemy?" You know, so I mean, these beautiful storytellers, you know, reflect against a total alternative narrative that we're now facing, not only in the States but in Europe, how the stranger is turned into an enemy. So I think we need stories to combat, you know, simplistic times. And we were talking, I'm jumping, but isn't it amazing today we were talking about there was a march around the world today for science, in favour of science. Did you hear about that? I mean, you don't think that's absolutely unbelievable? Sometimes you have to just, I mean, we say, they say we'll always do social realism, but when you look around the world, it almost looks totally surreal. You know, I mean, there we have main leaders sympathetic to torture in the United States, the Attorney General, the head of the CIA, and Donald Trump, sympathetic to torture. Scott Pruitt, you know, is a climate change denier in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, 8 men own the same as 50% of the world's population. You know, I mean, if you had that in a script, nobody would believe it. I mean, you really wouldn't, you know. If you had these people who are, it's almost like the Enlightenment ideals are under threat, and we have to have a march for science. I mean, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? That actually, you know, we have to have a march in favour of rationality as opposed to stupidity. I mean, a stand-up comic would do wonders with this, wouldn't he? But it's almost way beyond your imagination and how to capture that. I don't know. Big jump there, wasn't there?
I really like fairy tales, to be honest, and I already liked the Italian neorealism. After World War II, we had films by De Sica, The Miracle of Mailand, for example. It's a fantastic movie. It's a fairy tale, you know. And this is not a contradiction to speak about social reality, and on the other hand, to have a fairy tale or a kind of construction in a film. Because I have always the problem that sometimes I hear, oh, okay, your stories look so authentic, this is so realistic, it's like real life. No, it isn't. If we go to cinema, this has nothing to do with real life. You know? What we see on a screen is the invention of life. It's the idea of filmmakers who have an idea how to reflect about life. Yeah? And so we use storytelling elements, we use maybe fairy tales, and of course, as I already said, no one goes into the cinema to see a kind of social statement. Of course, everybody goes there to have a kind of experience. We want to laugh, we want to cry, we want to travel to distant areas, into the heads of very interesting characters, all these things. So this is what I want to experience in cinema. So I don't want to see statements. And so for that reason, I think we have to invent something to make it interesting, to reflect maybe about the reality of our world, for these fairy tale constructions, like in Looking for Eric, for example, or in The Miracle of Mailand, are fantastic, I think, because it's also a kind of invitation to the audience. Look into this story; it's fun. And maybe after leaving the cinema, you have laughed, you have cried, but then maybe you take something along with you on your way home, a kind of reflection. I don't believe that cinema can change the world. It's not possible. We have to do something else to change the world, I think. But maybe we can change something in the head of our audience, and that's interesting, I think. So they can take something with them, and if they experience a character like Daniel Blake, and the next time they are sitting at some stupid office, maybe they discover people around them and they see them with other eyes, and that's the important thing. And for that reason, we have to use artistic expressions. This is not documentary, you know. When I saw Riff Raff and when I see Ken Loach's works, I always thought, wow, how close does that come to reality, to my personal experiences? And then when I had the possibility to speak to Ken Loach for the first time, I discovered in what kind of fantastic artistic way he works, how difficult it is. It's always scripted. There's no improvisation at all. So it's a fantastic, very special method of directing, and this is art. So, and what we have to do is to find artistic expressions, and for that reason, I love fairy tales in cinema.
It's scripted, absolutely. Mostly by Paul Laverty, so let's continue that a little bit, because I ask Ken Loach very often about special scenes, and how did he do it? And he never answers, in a way, because it's magic in a way, but you can maybe describe it a little bit. It's a question of set designing, for instance, of the dialogues. We have to believe it. We have to believe the actors. As one of his methods is never to work with an actor again, with few exceptions. And I know some actors are really, really sad about that, and said, oh, we worked together, it was so great, I would love to do it again. Why is he so strict about that?
Well, it's not a fetish, you know. It's not like some strange rule. I mean, Ken, I must say, I'm so lucky to work with someone who's so respectful of the writing process. I mean, he's a very tough collaborator, but he's also very funny, which makes up for it. But you want a tough collaborator, one who's going to be demanding, but he's also a very generous director. And I think that's a beautiful thing about filmmaking. I mean, well, Andreas, I don't know how you work it, because I know you've improvised a lot and developed stuff, but I mean, with Ken, it's very different. You know, he's a director, I'm a writer, but we meet in the middle as filmmakers. And the lovely thing about working with Ken is you're involved all the way through. You know, so for example, the first experience we had was in Nicaragua, because I'd been working as a human rights lawyer in Nicaragua in the 80s. So it was useful just to be there, because I was a reference and I spoke, well, very bad Spanish, but I spoke Spanish. And I remembered how it was, and I was an eyewitness to the war in Central America. So I just thought that's what writers did, because it was my first time I was worked with Ken. But then I realised, as I met other writers, it was totally different. And so we do the casting together. He'll see many more people, but when they get a short list, I'd often do improvisations with them. And he's always said, what we try and do is find the person best to give life to the character as written. And so it's not that we don't want to use another person, but it's just we've always tried to find someone who fits that character best. And you know, sometimes there's a few people who have been in you know, a couple of films, repeated it, but we'll have different characters, so it's not so different cities, different accents. So, but there's several people that would be a privilege to work with again. They were such brilliant actors, but he gives great confidence to the actors too. In fact, as a director, I think that's what you do, is you give confidence to everyone in the team. You know what I mean? We've worked together now with you know, Rebecca Bryan, another key collaborator who's often not appreciated, but we have the freedom to do all this, you know, digging around and messing around and getting confused and getting lost, because Rebecca's doing the engine room stuff and allowing us to, you know, to have that time which we need. And then, you know, with all the team that we have, many of them have worked together now for over 20 years. And it's given people confidence, given the actors confidence. And I think the actors, you know, are going to reveal themselves and take chances. They have to feel they're in a safe place. So it's been wonderful to see how he respects the actors and gives them that space too. You know, whether it's children or whether it's people who've never acted at all, like Paul Brannigan. We did a little film called Angel Share. Paul had been recently released from prison. He didn't turn up for the first 2 improvisations because he was really kind of very nervous. I'd met him when I was doing some research. And I says, come along and meet him. And I had to chase him up and find him. And he never turned up twice. And Ken didn't take the huff. He just waited. We eventually saw him. But Paul was treated the same way as somebody like Cillian Murphy, who's a wonderful professional actor. But he gives confidence to each and every one. And I have to say, the shoots are fantastic fun. Oh, really good.
Yeah. I saw, by the way, Angel Share in Cannes with English subtitles, and even the English colleagues were grateful for that. Just set in Glasgow, I didn't understand a word. Okay.
But for me, how is it for you as a writer? Because I know that all the actors do not know the script before shooting, when Ken is shooting. So I know from some people of his crew that the script is always hidden, so the actors do not know. So they get to know your script step by step while going through the stories. So it's interesting that an actor in a Ken Loach movie does not know the ending of his character. So even if his contract is a little bit shorter, he knows that he has to die a little or something like that. Yeah. But you never know before, right?
Well, it's not a golden rule. You know, like some people will maybe know more than others. But he shoots in sequence, just stars on day one and works the whole way through it. It was very funny when we went to Los Angeles to do Bread and Roses, and Ken explained that in his very quiet way, and then the guy just looked at him and he goes, no, we don't do that in this country. he says the last person to do that was Charlie Chaplin and then Cassavetes, you know, so we don't do that, but eventually we did it that way, and it works for Ken, and so I think it works better. I mean, a lot of actors really love it. Because what they do is they'll get the script, you know, in stages, you know, so they feel fresh, they're living the story. I mean, I saw this when we did Land and Freedom. I was one of the milicianos, so nobody knew what the hell was going on. So when Blanca gets shot at the end, it really was stunning, you know, because Kenny always says, you know, actors can do lots of things, they're absolutely brilliant, but to play shock is quite difficult. I mean, you are actually shocked in the moment, you know. I think you do get something often quite different. And if they don't get something that's good, well, you can always do it again. The shock's gone, but he always tries to play with that. Yep.
Paul just talked about the actors. I mean, it's not exactly, but a bit the same with you. You worked with famous actors, but not with glamorous stars. I couldn't imagine a movie made by Andreas Dresen with Veronica Ferres, let's say it that way. Maybe it will happen.
It depends on the film, I would say. But I think there are so many different ways of getting a nice result. I think the way Ken is working is very interesting. I'm not sure if I could do it that way, but he's a master in directing that way. I had the possibility to speak to the Dresen brothers. We had a long trip together in a minibus, and so I had 8 hours to ask them whatever I wanted. That was wonderful for me, and I was totally surprised that they, for example, are rehearsing the whole film on set before they start to shoot. So, for example, the boy on the bicycle, which looks like a small neorealistic film, they had 45 days of rehearsing for that film. Then they had a break of, I think, 1 or 2 months, and then they started the shooting, and they did the rehearsing on the set with the camera, with everything. And I asked him, "Why didn't you shoot?" No, it was just a rehearsal. So they had altogether 90 days of shoot with the whole crew, with the actors, for creating this wonderful movie. So there are different ways, I think. So it's also a total contradiction to Ken's work. So, but I think the social intention is similar. I think they also try to speak about social topics in the society, and they. At the end, we have a result when you see the films of the Dresen brothers, or if you see the films of Ken, you have the feeling that it deals with society and it deals with reality. And these are different ways of going through the artistic process, I think. And so everybody has to find his own way, and there are different ways of filmmaking. I tried with improvisation sometimes, but it's not always helpful, I think. So, and of course, it's not always improvisation what looks improvised. There's also a lot of preparation for that. We have always a step outline, sometimes prepared parts of dialogue. So it depends, you know. But of course, no one goes to the set without preparation. You need an input. And when we did Stopped on Track, we prepared ourselves for half a year together with the actors, and then we started the shooting. So, but these are different styles of working, I think. And I was really interested to speak to Ken because I was wondering how he gets these wonderful results, and I was surprised that he only gives his actors the next scene of the next day. Maybe, sometimes not.
It depends if it was a very complex scene or not. For example, we did a film, The Wind That Shakes the Barley. There's a big debate scene at the end. There were kind of complex ideas that we just had to nail. So they were given plenty of time for that, you know. The Dresen brothers must have a great producer if they can get all that time. That's all I can say.
They do.
Yeah, the producers are greatly underestimated in my opinion. I've got great respect for all the fighting and the tussle that they do. And you know, working with Thierry Boain, you know, my partner, we did 2 films, Even the Rain and The Olive Tree. But the budgets were so tight, especially for Even the Rain, because it was, you know, part of it was set against the backdrop of, you know, kind of the water wars in Cochabamba in Bolivia. And some of it was 500 years ago, and some of it was shot in the Amazon rainforest. So people thought, what the hell is going on in this script? So they found it interesting, but they didn't want to put a lot of money in it, so they actually did it with the skin of their teeth. And they would have benefited enormously having a little bit more time. But sometimes you just have to go on with it, because you just don't know what the framework is behind. So I think, you know, films arrive sometimes, and there's an energy to them because they were shot that way in a terrible rush, and they look that way. And I think, you know, Thea did an amazing job with such a complex idea, with such a short period of time, up against the rainy season. And, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen. So there's, it's a fragile process, I think, you know, because not everybody has that time and luxury. And I'm sure there's many people here who have been fighting against deadlines and would love extra moment. But sometimes then what you have to do is use your imagination. For example, Even the Rain, we couldn't do the historic scenes, so we just did them in another way. You know, just reading the script of this, it's a long story, you have to see the film first, but actually the limitations actually became a great advantage because it gave us the possibility to reimagine a scene and give it some sort of contemporary significance in a way we would never have got a twist on it if we'd just done it as a scene from 500 years ago. So sometimes the limitations can really be an advantage to you, you know, so to think laterally and to force you to rewrite the script And I think that's really important to, I don't know how many writers are here, but I think it's a great lesson sometimes to say, well, if this is not working, think off the wall, think laterally, and see if you can twist it and turn it and do it in a totally different, original way. So sometimes the limitations give a great advantage, I think.
Please allow one more question about Ken Loach, whom we really love very much. So he was here for the premiere of Ideen, like the Berlin premiere with the Luxembourg Foundation. I was hosting that premiere. It was amazing. We were standing outside, and I tried to do an interview during the screening, because he knew the movie, but he went in every 5 minutes and said, oh, now the scene with the girl, I have to see it again. It's I have to see the reaction. I couldn't believe it. I mean, he saw the movie about 100 times. So he's 82. I mean,
Memory, he just wants to remember what happened before the Q&A.
unbelievable. He's still so passionate and enthusiastic about his work. What is this? What is a miracle? It's like a miracle. Still, explain it to us.
Well, he's a bandit. He's a bandit, really. He's got great. What I love about Ken actually is he's got great curiosity. He's like a child sometimes, and I've noticed it as well. I think like some people have asked me what I like to direct afterwards, and I think you should always do what you get most excited by. And I remember very early on when we started, the first time I was actually on a shoot was Carla's song in Nicaragua. And then sometimes you just see him behind the camera and you'd see him watching the actors and he was totally in it like a child. I mean, enjoying it, not going, I mean, obviously he's got an eye to, is it working and all this, but there was a kind of a childlike curiosity and he was actually in his own soup. You know, you ever see a child drawing, you know, and they're just like, that's what they should be doing. You know, you see someone who can sing, or, you know, and I think it's good to do what you feel most drawn, and I think he just loves that process. He loves the magic of trying to capture that. And so I think there's a kind of an innocence. I mean, there's great technique, and he's, you know, really rational, and he makes very rational decisions, but in the moment, I think there's a childishness, you know, and an enjoyment. And that's why he's 80 and he's got the energy of a bloody teenager. He's unbelievable. You know, you can only see in one eye now as well. You know, he still can't slow the bastard down. And he's unbelievable, you know. So I think if he's got great curiosity, you know, and so I think sometimes we shouldn't judge people by their age, you know.
And it's real passion, I think. It's real passion for his work and for people.
Is it true that you call him every day on the phone? He lives in Bath and you...
Not that I would admit to, no.
But during the process of working and
oh, well, we're on the phone... Yeah, regularly about many things, because filmmaking is one of the few things we try and do together. We're involved in all sorts of stuff, you know, from, yeah, we're in kind of constant contact, sending stuff back and forward, and football scores, and
do you see the
important things like that, you know.
Do you see the rushes?
Oh yeah, we do watch the rushes together, and
you criticize the rushes?
Yeah, tell me he's rubbish. It's all this praise from all you guys, so I've got to keep him down to earth. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's it's not that type of relationship where we compliment each other really. Too Glaswegian for that. I might do it here when he's not here, but.
So Andreas already talked about the impact, probably impact of art on society, not in a direct way, but you said it could be possible that it changed a bit our way of thinking, of considering the things. So what do you think about the impact? I mean, can Loach really change the thing in a way, even cause a debate in the parliament? And with Kress many years ago, it was really a very deep development in society.
Well, I mean, there's a film that he did called Cathy Come Home, you know, his 50th anniversary, and it was a remarkable piece, and it was done in more innocent days, because there was only 2 television stations at that time. And of course, previously, all the BBC films were shot, you know, they were more like theatre inside a stage. So everything was quite false, and then you get posh actors to play down, you know, put on a working class accent, and Ken had none of that. And he went out to the street and used real people in real locations. So I think it blew people's mind, because people couldn't say, well, is this fact or is it fiction? And it drove the Tories absolutely mad. You know, and of course, it was a story inspired by, you know, what they had found. So it led to an enormous debate. And but there were more innocent times, because like so many of the population saw the Wednesday plays, like something like, you know, 18 or 20 million people had, you know, watched it when it came out, and then more and more people saw it. So about 95% of the population had actually heard of it. Whereas now even a blockbuster, you know, everything's so dissipated now. You know, it wouldn't have that kind of cultural penetration, that film. But having said that, Daniel Blake, you know, it led to an amazing debate, you know, in the UK. And I think it was because there were so many lies told. And I think the great thing about fiction is when there's so much misinformation and the welfare law is so complex, a drama can actually open the door and bring you in close. You can look into someone's eyes, you go into their house, you see their relationships, you understand their past life, you get an insight into their personalities. So the beautiful thing about this medium we're so lucky to work in, it's just so multifaceted, isn't it? You know, we can look into someone's eyes, we can hear their dialogue, we can hear the sound of their voice, we can look at their city and know if it's industrial or what's happening from it. You see the neighbours, the houses, we know it's tons of richness. You know, the music can help us, and so it's a magical format for bringing you in close and putting you in someone else's shoes. So I think what it can do is it can open doors. And I mean, I think that's a great thing to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine that. And then if you do that, then sometimes, well, I'm reminded of St. Augustine from 1500 years ago. He said, you know, hope is two beautiful daughters, anger at the way things are, and the courage to try and change them. And I think like film by themselves will change nothing, in the same way as reading a book will change nothing. But in another way, it can change everything. I mean, after I read Primo Levi, you're a different person, aren't you? You know, you're a different person because you've seen something you'd never otherwise imagined. You can see humanity in all sorts of people, you know, on both sides of that terrible history. And so I think it leads to complexity and your insight into human nature. And in many ways, I think then that is a way then that people can come together and do things. Because if you don't challenge power, you know, if you don't take them on, you know, nothing will change. Because the Tories now condemned this film at the beginning. And then it was debated in Parliament. But they have not given one single inch. Not one single inch. And they've continued to lie about it. And I'm not using that, again, just as a false allegation. I've heard them lie about what they do and the statistics and the information. And then you realise when you see that they're hard-nosed bastards, and the only thing that will change it is if you take power. You know, and a film won't do that, but you hope it nourishes the hinterland in the same way that a good book or a play or something else might do.
Yeah, sorry, I mixed up the titles. It was Casey Come Home that provoked that exactly that debate. Well, 1 hour is over. We have an amazing band then here. It's Höchster Eisenbahn. They need a kind of time to prepare everything. So if you have questions right now, very precise questions. If not here,
brilliant English.
yes. If not here, I mean, these gentlemen are still here. You can ask. You see that. Just go there, ask them. They're very friendly and open and amazing guys, as you probably noticed. Thank you so much. It was a great. Thank you so much.